The sun rose slow and red over the Dry Creek Ranch, spilling light across weathered fences and wide pastures that had seen better years. Josie Caldwell stood at the edge of the corral, hands on her hips, watching dust rise as the cattle shifted restlessly. Today marked the beginning of the ranch's final branding, one last effort to mark calves before the land was sold off piece by piece. The thought sat heavy in her chest, heavier than the worn leather gloves in her hands. Creek had been in her family for 3 generations. Now it was barely hanging on. She wiped sweat from her brow and turned as hoofbeats approached from the west road. A lone rider crested the hill, silhouetted against the morning sky. He sat easy in the saddle, hat pulled low, coat dusty from miles of travel. Not one of the neighbors, she noted. Folks around here didn't ride like that anymore. Too steady, too unhurried. The cowboy reined in near the fence and tipped his hat. "Morning," he said, voice calm and rough, like gravel smoothed by years of wind. "Heard you might need an extra pair of hands." Josie narrowed her eyes. "You heard wrong place for charity." "Not charity," he replied. "Work. I'm Arthur." She studied him, sun-browned skin, a jaw shadowed with stubble, eyes sharp but distant, like a man always watching the horizon for the next place to go. A drifter, she guessed, the kind that never stayed long enough to leave footprints. "Well, Arthur," she said, "this is a branding, not a sightseeing stop. It's hot, it's hard, and it won't pay much." "That's fine," he said simply. "I don't plan on staying." The words struck sharper than she expected. Josie looked away, toward the barns that needed repairs and the house that creaked louder each year. No one ever planned on staying here anymore. She sighed. "If you can rope and don't complain, you can help. We start now." Arthur swung down from his horse and tied the reins with practiced ease. He moved like someone who'd done this all his life, because he had. As they worked, Josie couldn't help but notice how smoothly he handled the cattle, how he read their movements before they made them. He didn't waste motion or words. He just worked. By mid-morning, the heat pressed down hard. Sweat soaked Josie's shirt, her arms aching as she wrestled a calf into position. Arthur was there instantly, steadying the animal, murmuring low until it stilled. "You run this place alone?" he asked. "Since my father passed," she said. "And before you ask, no, I'm not selling because I want to." He nodded, not pressing. That surprised her. During a short break, they sat on the fence, sharing water from a canteen. Josie watched him from the corner of her eye. Most men talked too much when silence made them uncomfortable. Arthur seemed at home in it. "So where you headed after this?" she asked. "Wherever the road bends," he said. "I don't stay long anywhere." She nodded, though something twisted inside her chest. Dry Creek was ending. He was just passing through. Funny how endings always seemed to meet people who refused to begin. When the day finally wound down, the sun dipping low, Josie looked over the marked calves and felt a strange mix of pride and grief. One last branding. One last season. Arthur untied his horse. "I'll ride out in the morning." She surprised herself by saying, "We've got another long day tomorrow." He met her gaze, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Then I'll stay one more day." Josie watched him ride toward the bunkhouse, telling herself it meant nothing. Just a cowboy passing through. But the ranch felt different already. If it knew something she didn't yet dare to hope, morning came early at Dry Creek Ranch. The kind of morning that crept in soft before crashing down with heat and labor. Josie was already awake when Arthur stepped out of the bunkhouse, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off the road that still clung to him. He paused when he saw her by the corral, hair pulled back tight, sleeves already rolled. "You're up before the sun," he said. "Cattle don't wait," she replied, handing him a rope. "Neither do bills." Arthur gave a quiet huff of amusement and took the rope without comment. They worked side by side as the ranch came alive, iron heating over the fire, calves bawling, dust rising thick in the air. The rhythm of branding settled in, familiar and punishing, yet steadied by an unspoken coordination between them. Arthur anticipated Josie's movements before she made them. When a calf kicked free, he was there. When her grip slipped, his hands steadied hers. It wasn't showy or forced, it was natural, like they'd been doing this together for years, instead of hours. By late morning, the sun blazed overhead. Josie straightened slowly, one hand pressed to her lower back. Arthur noticed. "Take a break," he said. "I'm fine." He met her stubborn look, with one just as firm. "You won't be if you keep pushing." She hesitated, then relented, sitting on a fallen fence post. Arthur passed her the canteen again, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact lingered longer than it should have. "Why keep this place going?" he asked quietly. "If it's ending anyway." Josie stared out at the open land, the rolling hills, the worn fence lines, the cottonwood near the creek. "Because it matters," she said. "Because my father believed land remembers who loves it. And I'm not ready to let it forget us." Arthur absorbed that in silence. He'd known plenty of land, but never anything that asked him to stay. Later that afternoon, a calf spooked and bolted. Josie lunged too fast, her boots sliding in loose dirt. She went down hard with a sharp cry. Arthur was at her side instantly. "Easy," he said, steadying her as she winced. Her ankle throbbed, anger flashing in her eyes before pain took over. "I can walk, I know," he said gently, "but let me help." She didn't argue this time. He wrapped her ankle with practiced care, hands firm but careful. Josie watched him from beneath her lashes, struck by how focused he was, how he treated her injury like it mattered. Like she mattered. They finished early that day. As dusk settled, Josie insisted on making supper. Arthur offered to leave her to it, but she shook her head. No reason to eat alone. The words surprised them both. They sat at the small kitchen table, the house filled with the smell of beans and cornbread. The walls were lined with old photographs, smiling faces, cattle drives, branding days long past. "Do you ever think about staying somewhere?" Josie asked, voice casual, eyes on her plate. Arthur leaned back, chair creaking. "Staying leads to losing. I've learned that." She looked up then. "Running leads to losing too." The silence that followed was thick, not uncomfortable, just honest. Outside, crickets sang under a sky bursting with stars. When Arthur stood to leave, Josie walked him to the porch. "Mother Day tomorrow," she said. He nodded. Another day. As he headed toward the bunkhouse, Arthur felt something unfamiliar tug at his chest. He'd told her he didn't plan to stay, but for the first time in a long while, the road didn't seem to be calling quite so loudly. The third day began with tension hanging heavier than the heat. Clouds rolled low over Dry Creek Ranch, threatening rain that never quite fell. Josie moved with quiet determination, her ankles stiff but manageable. Arthur noticed anyway, slowing his pace to match hers without saying a word. Branding was nearly done. The end was close of the work, of the season, of the ranch itself. By mid-morning, the sound of approaching riders cut through the lowing cattle. Josie stiffened as three men rode up, well-dressed for ranch work, and smiling in ways that didn't reach their eyes. The man in front dismounted with a confidence that made Josie's jaw tighten. "Morning, Josie," he said. "Thought I'd stop by and see how things were progressing." Arthur stayed where he was, coiling a rope, but his attention sharpened. "Clay Turner," Josie said flatly. "You're early." Clay's gaze flicked to Arthur. "Didn't realize you hired help." "Just passing through," Arthur said calmly. Clay smirked. "Aren't we all?" Josie folded her arms. "What do you want, Clay?" "To remind you, the offer still stands," he said, gesturing toward the land. "Sell now and avoid the trouble that comes with delays." Arthur caught the edge beneath the polite words. "Sounds like pressure." Clay's eyes hardened briefly before he laughed. "This is business." "Then take it somewhere else," Josie snapped. "We're working." Clay leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "This place is bleeding money. You can't save it, Josie. Best accept that." Arthur stepped forward then, his presence solid and unyielding. You done talking? Clay studied him for a long moment, then straightened. For now, as the riders left, Josie exhaled shakily. He's been circling this land for months, she said, waiting for me to break. Arthur looked out across the ranch. You won't. She met his gaze, surprised by the certainty in his voice. Later, as thunder rolled far off, Josie found Arthur repairing a broken fence line. She leaned against the post, watching him work. You didn't have to step in, she said. Maybe not, he replied. But I wanted to. That answer stayed with her. The storm never came, but the sky darkened anyway. They finished the last of the branding by late afternoon. Josie watched the marked calves scatter into the pasture, a bittersweet ache settling in her chest. That's it, she said softly. Last branding day. Arthur removed his hat, holding it against his chest in a quiet gesture of respect. Your family would be proud. The words undid her more than she expected. That evening, they sat by the fire pit behind the house. The air cooled just enough to bring relief. Flames flickered between them, shadows dancing across Arthur's face. You ever wonder what would have happened if you stayed somewhere? Josie asked. Arthur stared into the fire. I stayed once, lost everything. She didn't ask more. She didn't need to. When a sudden gust sent sparks flying, Josie flinched. Arthur's hand found hers, steady and warm. Neither of them pulled away. This place, it gets under your skin, she said. I've noticed, he replied quietly. The night stretched on, filled with unspoken truths. Arthur knew he should leave in the morning. That was always the rule. But as he looked at Josie strong, stubborn, holding on to something worth fighting, for he realized leaving might cost him more than staying ever had. And that scared him more than the open road ever could. The morning after the last branding dawned unusually quiet. No cattle bawling, no iron heating, over the fire just wind, moving through the grass like a long sigh. Josie stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching Arthur saddle his horse near the bunkhouse. The sight tightened something in her chest. So this was how endings looked. Quiet, ordinary, unavoidable. Arthur felt her eyes on him and paused, resting a hand on the saddle horn. He'd packed light, as always. No reason to gather memories when you didn't intend to keep them. You heading out? Josie asked, though she already knew the answer. That was the plan, he said. She nodded once. Roads clear to the south. Silence settled between them. Arthur glanced toward the pastures, now marked and calm. Dry Creek stood behind Josie like a living thing, tired, proud, and still standing. Clay Turner rode in just before noon. This time he came alone, his horse fresh, his smile confident. Thought I'd find you here, he said, tipping his hat toward Josie. Paperwork's ready. Today's as good a day as any to sign. Josie's grip tightened on her coffee cup. I told you no. Clay shrugged. You're out of time. Arthur stepped forward, voice low. She said no. Clay laughed softly. And who are you to decide? Arthur didn't answer. He just stood his ground. Clay's gaze flicked between them, understanding dawning. Careful, Cowboy. You don't even belong here. Something in Arthur shifted. Then something old and worn, finally refusing to bend. Maybe I do. Josie turned to him, startled. Clay scoffed. Sentiment won't save this place. No, Josie said, lifting her chin. But I might. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded letter. I secured a short-term lease with the neighboring ranch. Shared grazing. It buys me time. Clay's smile vanished. You went around me. I went around someone who didn't have my best interests in mind, she replied calmly. Clay glared, then mounted his horse. This isn't over. When he rode off, the ranch felt lighter, like it had taken a full breath, for the first time in months. Arthur exhaled slowly. You didn't need me for that. Josie smiled faintly. No, but I'm glad you were here. That afternoon, Arthur finally led his horse to the road. Josie walked with him to the fence line. The sun dipped low, painting the land gold. So this is it, she said. He nodded, then hesitated. The road stretched before him, familiar and safe. Behind him stood a woman, and a place that had asked something of him he'd never planned to give. I said, "I don't stay," he said. "I know," she replied softly. "And I won't ask you to." Arthur swallowed. "But I'm tired of running." Her breath caught. He turned back, toward the ranch. "If you'll have me, I'd like to see what staying feels like." Josie's smile was slow and real, the kind that reached her eyes. Dry Creek could use a cowboy who knows how to choose. As the sun set, Arthur unsaddled his horse not as a traveler, but as a man who'd finally found a place worth calling home. For the first time in years, the road could wait. Morning returned to Dry Creek Ranch with a softness Josie hadn't felt in years. The air was cool, the sky wide and clear, and for once the future didn't feel like a weight pressing down on her shoulders. She stepped out onto the porch and found Arthur already there, repairing a loose board on the railing like he'd been doing it all his life. "You don't waste time," she said, smiling. Arthur glanced back at her, sunlight catching in his eyes. "Figured if I'm staying, I should start acting like it." The word "staying still" sounded unreal. Josie leaned against the porch post, watching him work. There was comfort in the quiet between them, now not the uncertain silence of strangers, but the easy kind that came when two people chose the same place. They spent the morning walking the land together. Arthur listened as Josie talked through her plans, rotating, grazing, repairing the south fence, reopening the old spring by the creek. He didn't interrupt or correct her. He asked questions, thoughtful ones, the kind that made her realize she wasn't carrying the ranch alone anymore. At the far pasture, Arthur stopped and looked out across the rolling hills. "My father ran cattle once," he said, "lost it all to debt and drought. After that, I learned not to settle anywhere long enough to hurt." Josie reached for his hand. "Staying doesn't mean losing," she said. "Sometimes it means building something strong enough to last." He squeezed her fingers, grounding himself in the truth of it. Later that afternoon, neighbors rode in curious, cautious, hopeful. Word had traveled fast that Dry Creek hadn't folded after all. Josie stood taller as she greeted them, Arthur at her side. No longer the passing cowboy, no longer alone. As the sun dipped low, they lit a small fire near the corral. The cattle moved calmly in the distance, their brand's fresher mark of endurance rather than an ending. Josie watched the flames dance and felt something settle deep in her bones. "I used to think this was the last thing my family would leave behind," she said softly. "Now it feels like the beginning of something new." Arthur looked at her, his voice steady. "Love has a way of making a man choose a home." She smiled, tears bright in her eyes. "And a ranch has a way of choosing who belongs." As night fell, Arthur wrapped an arm around her shoulders. The stars spread wide above them, the same stars that had watched over generations beforehand would watch over them now. Dry Creek Ranch stood quiet, but alive. Not because the land had been saved by force or fortune, but because two stubborn hearts had decided to stay. Sometimes the last branding wasn't an ending at all. It was a promise. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.